It is reported in the 8th chapter of the book of John that a woman was brought before Christ Jesus who had been caught in the act of committing adultery. The accusers said that the law of Moses demands that she should be killed for her crime by throwing stones at her until she is dead. Jesus defended the woman by urging her accusers to look into their heart. He suggested that if there was one man among them without sin on his record, he should be the first to throw a stone. We are told that no one did so. The accusers simply walked away, as if no real crime had been committed. Christ Jesus said to the woman, who stood with him alone, "Neither do I condemn you, go, and sin no more." In some of the modern Bibles the story has been removed. It doesn't fit the modern theology of a disconnected humanity. In modern theology, man is deemed to have been created by God out of dust, like sandcastles are fashioned on a beach, and had life breathed into his creation, that was then let go to fend for itself in a disconnected existence, while God moved on. Every form of personal sense is rooted in this fundamental error in theology that is reflected in nearly all religions. The widely accepted concepts of immortal existence, mortal mind, personal sense, personal intelligence, personal power, personal wealth, and so on, are rooted in the theology of life unfolding in a disconnected state in isolation from God, so that prayer is needed to call God to attention for special favors. In oligarchic theology, God's role is further defined as a dictator of restrictive laws, and as a penal institution that issues punishment against mankind for taking wrong steps along the way. You step out of line, zap. Man becomes doomed to cowardice and fear. Don't raise your head. Zap. In all too many cases the death penalty has been applied throughout the ages, all in the name of God. That's a childish game, isn't it? Society has been intensively brainwashed by this theology for millennia, often with torture. Society has bowed to this gross theology of an isolated, but divinely penalized, existence for millennia, and has murdered one another in God's name, which it still does to some degree. Christ Jesus had said, no. Christ Jesus illustrated that there is no such thing as a fundamentally disconnected and isolated existence, except in the form of a false belief. He cracked the shell of false belief and demonstrated the inseparable connection between God and man, in their unity of one, or God and man being one. The story of Jesus defending the adulterous woman evidently went against the grain of the theology of a disconnected humanity that is deemed inherently sinful, which must be whipped into line with penalties, including the death penalty, for the crime of committing adultery, or rape by personal sense, for which typically the victim is punished. The story has evidently been removed from the Bible, probably because Jesus said no to the theology of a disconnected existence. He may have said to the accusers, if you condemn love, you condemn God, because love is reflected in love. Thus, he had acted boldly in denial of established doctrines, and had dared to defend the woman. Moreover, he had done it in a way that had set the accusers free to love enough in the name of God, not to condemn the woman. He had freed them from a false law that had demanded them to become murderers. He had freed them to love themselves more. He had turned the entire theology of a disconnected humanity upside down, in every respect. That's why the story was removed from the Bible, just like the Susanna story in the 13th chapter of the book of Daniel was removed. Technically speaking, Jesus had even defended the concept of adultery itself by defending the adulterous woman. After he had said to her that he didn't condemn her either, he had said to the woman, lifting her chin up, sin no more, as if to say, don't you dare to condemn yourself too, for having acted in the flow of love. Was Christ Jesus speaking for adultery then, in defending the woman? Was he speaking for the infinite sense? Was he saying that the mindless dragon does not apply? His infinite sense, the soul-inspired sense of man being one with God, and without disconnection, had brought a light into the scene against which the accusers' childish accusations could not stand up, even in their own sight. Perhaps they began to recognize that adultery means something different than they supposed, that it had something to do with actually living as an adult. They may have sensed that Jesus had made a valid point in defending the woman as a child of God. Perhaps out of shame for their small-minded thinking, they walked away, lest they might be condemning God. It might well be that they were condemning the dragon instead, and did not revert back to their mindless standpoint. Christ Jesus had raised the scene to a conflict between serpentine lies crying about a disconnected humanity, captivated by the great red dragon, and lifted society up to the truth of an infinitely, universally connected humanity. He saw the woman standing on this path. In this conflict, Christ Jesus intervened on the side of spiritual sense and began speaking for adultery, a specific kind of adultery. He was saying to the people who condemned the woman, who condemned the sense of soul that brings God to light, please stop your childish parade of ignorance, of penalizing one another as a disconnected humanity. Grow up, people. Start behaving like adults in spirit. The woman whom you accuse has acted boldly as an adult in spirit and has defied your childish creeds, or else she wouldn't be here. But deep in your heart you don't believe the crap yourself that you are accusing her with. The childish game that you play is your own undoing. So wake up, people, you are not babies anymore. Evidently there was a specific need for love to be expressed in the specific case the woman had been involved in. She had expressed the love that the doctrines had denied and had demanded to be blocked. This means that the woman had acted like an adult and fulfilled the human need by letting love shine. She had fulfilled her debt to love, like every person who has grown up in spirit into an adult would do. Let's not stomp onto any single aspect of the wide scene of universal love that God has provided for humanity, but trace it up with ever more love, and this ever more universally expressed. Your Father knows what you have need of and is supplying it in rich measure, more fully than you can ask for, and are willing to accept. Do you say that this is where her sin is located? If you say, yes, the sin is on you. The sin is located in you, by not accepting your being one with God, with infinite, universal, divine love. Yes, people, this woman has committed adultery in the most important sense, by behaving like a spiritual adult. I am proud of her. God gave her a heart of love, and this love that flows through it is always supported by God, because God is love. She had acted like a spiritual adult and had not turned God down, who inspires love in all its numerous expressions. God is love. God is good. Love and good are never personal. They are universal. This is how they are, and are expressed, and cannot be expressed on any smaller scale. Personal love is technically impossible. Any attempt to force love to be personal is a form of self-denial. While there are countless individual forms of the infinite expressions of love possible, of the one universal divine love, none of the expressions are personal, and need be so understood for the divine color of love to be realized. Love is a universal quality of God that is uplifting, enriching, ennobling. Love defines our humanity. Love is divine. No one can measure it, or weigh it, or see its color, but we know that whenever it is withdrawn, civilization begins to collapse accordingly, and humanity with it. This doom is experienced whenever love is pushed into the background, and its flow is interposed. But ultimately, no one can stop divine love from being reflected, because everything that is real is divine, and is as universal as divine love is, being reflected in love. Love is universal. It cannot be otherwise. In the divine universe, all of humanity is more closely married to one another in this all-uniting flow of infinite divine love than by any artificial union that a priest would sanctify. So why not move with the divine winds? Expand your marriages. Let them form a seed kernel that unfolds in ever-widening forms of expression with which civilization is built, that fulfills all human needs. The conventional adultery that you crow about, he may have said to the woman's accusers, is a product of a small-minded society that is failing itself, that is missing the boat. You thereby stand self-condemned by your condemnations of the woman. Adultery is a process of stepping away from the small-minded conventions of society. It is a process of shedding the diapers and becoming an adult in spirit. Jesus might have said something like that if there existed the slightest chance that it would have been understood. From the scientific spiritual standpoint, it is the small marriage bond that is dangerous to society because it builds a fence around people that isolates them against the reflection of universal love. The denial of the principle of universal love has tragic consequences for humanity. It isolates people from one another and nations from one another. It enables wars. It becomes a model for the tragedy of a mutually disconnected cultural and political landscape. Isn't this what we need to get away from? We need to get away from the notion that isolated and disconnected existence is divine. We need to step away from this urgently because wars are only prevented to the degree that society embraces the spiritual norm of the principle of universal love and thereby becomes adult in their loving. Having laid their swaddling clothes aside. When Mary Baker Eddy founded her church on an infinite, impersonal platform, she made no provisions for the conventional small marriages. Instead, she left the scene wide open for the infinite, universal platform to unfold that makes its own demands. On the infinite platform, the woman in the apocalypse symbolizes generic man, the spiritual idea of God, which Mary Baker Eddy thereby renders synonymous with the Christ, which she likewise defines as the spiritual idea of God. With these statements, she set up a tall ideal for humanity. The great universal ideal has posed great challenges for society to live up to. It is not an easy step for one to grow up from an infantile sense of the divine reflection in man to the full adult certainty that unfolds profound experiences and commitments to the truth. In this context, the first period of the development of Christian Science, from Mary Baker Eddy's discovery of it in 1866, to the first full edition of her textbook, the third edition, in 1881, may be termed a period of a grand awakening. The period was followed by a second period that became a period of growing up to spiritual adulthood. The second period of growing up ends with the famous landmark edition of her textbook, the 50th edition, the anniversary edition, published in 1891. After the diapers had been put aside, the mature building of the church could begin, which became the third period in the development of Christian Science. This period can be seen as an adult period in spiritual terms. The period ended with another landmark edition of her textbook, the 226th edition, published in 1902. Nor did the development of Christian Science stop at this stage. Ever greater development became possible, as if to say, there exists a limit to what can be accomplished. However, a significant barrier was encountered at the boundary between growing up and adulthood. She identified the barrier with the term soul. When her glossary definition for the term God is applied to the biblical concept of a city foursquare in the manner of a platform, the term soul ends up straddled in the middle of the four columns, as the term soul is not specifically defined in her glossary. For details, see the video, From the Letter to the Spirit Unfolding. The evidence tells us that Mary Baker Eddy saw the demands of soul as a barrier to moving forward in the conventional way. Near the end of the second period, Mary Baker Eddy closed the door on every structure that she had created that stood on a corporate, corporeal, or personal platform, and dissolved it, or requested that it be dissolved. This includes all corporate and personal structures that she had organized, even those that she had personally served over the previous 23 years since her discovery of Christian Science. They were all resolutely dissolved in 1889. She looked at the future, at where the church needed to be, and recognized that one cannot build a spiritual platform for an endless future by building on corrupt foundations. If the goal is to bring the divine infinite into expression, every concept and convention that is encumbered with material and personal limits, personal conflicts, is therefore a poison that needs to be left behind in order for the field to be open to God, the infinite. The filter that blocks the poison is soul. Personal teaching, personal preaching, organizational dictates, oligarchic practices, none of them make the grade. As Mary Baker Eddy saw it, they had to be dissolved before a higher level building process could begin. Her take was that material dissolution fosters spiritual evolution. She had reached a point in the development of Christian Science in the world where the old simply had to be put aside. She took the diapers off because they were no longer useful and had become a hindrance. She said in essence that we have become adults in spirit. We are the children of light, let us walk in the light, or as Paul had put it, let us put off the old man, for we see through a glass, darkly, but then face to face. Paul had said, when I was a child, I spake as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child, but when I became a man, I put away childish things. Our soul sense, reflecting the infinite sense of divine soul, puts up a barrier against everything that doesn't measure up against the divine standard, the principle of universal love, and opens the divine interface to this principle for its implementation in our world. This means that our developed soul sense is more than just a barrier against the false. It functions, once it is activated, as an interface with the infinite. With our soul sense thus established and developed, a new age for building can begin where everything is placed on a platform that is secure, where it is placed on an adult platform, in the spiritual sense, which opens up horizons that are not discernible on a lesser basis. With all this done, the church was reorganized on a universal impersonal basis. It was not incorporated, but established by a trust, as an idea to fulfill a specific purpose. Under the trust, which defines the name and the purpose of the church, an edifice was constructed with a governing structure attached to it under the authority of a church manual that defines its structure and processes. The edifice, seating 1,200, was built in less than a year from start to finish and was fully paid for by donations on Dedication Day, in the first week of the new year, in 1895. It stood tall, as a beautiful symbol, appropriate for the beginning accomplishment of a great purpose. With the soul gateway now activated, progress became explosive, and the mental atmosphere exuberant. 5 years after the edifice was built, it became so inadequate that multiple services needed to be held each Sunday. On Mary Baker Eddy's suggestion, it was voted in the annual meeting of the church, in 1902, by the membership, that an extension edifice will be built with a capacity for 5,000. And so it was done. The cornerstone was laid 2 years later, in 1904. Then 2 years later again, the giant edifice was completed and fully paid for by donations. 30,000 people had come to Boston for the communion and dedication service on June 10, 1906. The dedication service for the magnificent temple for the Mother Church of Christ Scientist, as Mary Baker Eddy had referred to it in her dedication address, had to be conducted 6 times that day, consecutively, to accommodate all. This was the type of response that unfolded when the soul gateway was activated to the infinite domain of divine mind and spirit. It is self-evident that Mary Baker Eddy could not bring the small marriage model onto this boundless scene, that evermore became a monumental manifest of the divine principle of universal love. The expanding impetus of this principle impels one to leave the small model behind. It impels us not to scrap the idea of human unions, but to uplift its expression in thought, and indeed to approximate to some degree the divine truth, in which all humanity is already more closely married to one another and human beings than a priest could sanctify, uplifting the marriage model to become a sea kernel for ever wider forms of expression of the reality inherent in our humanity. Sure, this higher demand poses no small challenges in the small-minded world. But what of it? Do the challenges alter the principle involved? I have written a series of 12 novels for the exploration of the principle of universal love. It started as a single novel that I named Discovering Love. However, the spiritual dimension proved to be far too wide for the subject to be explored in a single treatise. By the time the work was done, the end product was a series of 12 novels. I called the series The Lodging for the Rose. I have discovered recently that the 12 novels unfold in essence along the line of the natural progression of awaking, shedding the diapers, becoming adults past the portal of the soul being made wider and wider, culminating in a growing exuberance with a growing sense of humanity. I have also discovered recently that the same progression is also evident in the novels. It comes to light right from the beginning in 4 different types of unfolding relationships that the main protagonist develops with 4 different women that he comes into contact with in the story of the first novel, Discovering Love. Erica discovered the world beyond the small, but she lacks the depth on which it can unfold. Helen is a healer who has taken many a diaper off and growing out of the conventional encumberment. Witzsche and Steve have dissolved the small platform in their mind and have moved away from it and built a taller platform with the portal of the human soul links to the divine soul and the dimension of truth. The platform that unfolds with them stands tall across the entire series of novels, which itself unfolds as single story. Heather is drawn into the exuberance of the unfolding spiritual adult scene built with Witzsche and Steve. The portal to the divine soul that stands between growing up and adulthood is critical in all aspects of civilization. This is critical because when the gateway remains unrecognized and thereby closed, the transition to adulthood in spirit remains blocked. When the gateway remains closed, society denies itself its potential future. In the case of energy, it denies itself access to anything beyond the growing up stage. In its earliest awakening, humanity discovered its ability to use fire. The fuel for this fire typically was wood. Eventually coal was discovered as a fuel for fire. In more recent times, oil and gas resources were discovered as useful fuels for fire. In most recent times, nuclear fuels were added to the list of available fuels. Nuclear fusion technology may extend the burning of fuels for fire still further. At the present, a number of large unresolved critical problems stand in the way for nuclear fusion power to become practical. Nevertheless, it appears possible that these problems can be solved over the next few decades. And this is how far the current horizon extends. Anything beyond that is deemed impossible. Nothing beyond that is deemed to exist. With humanity having been unable to free itself, and this extends to the present, from the oligarchic chokehold, humanity's scientific access would be blocked before it was able to avail itself of the limitless electric energy resources in cosmic space that exist in the form of plasma, which presently powers the sun and the galaxies. Humanity denies itself the use of this fire. It denies itself the use of this boundless energy resource for which no fuel is needed that would be used up. It is a resource that is abundantly available and has no depletion limits. With this resource being blocked by small-minded thinking and cultivated degeneration, humanity denies itself its own survival in the coming ice age, which potentially could begin 3 decades from now. While presently, hydroelectric power is hailed as a sustainable energy resource, and likewise power from windmills and solar collectors, these resources are the shortest-lived of them all, because their resource is the sun, and the sun is poised to lose 70% of its radiated energy when it goes inactive, and the next ice age begins. All green energy ends in roughly 30 years. Gas and oil deposits will be depleted in 60 years at present rates of depletion. Fuel reserves for nuclear power, which is currently under attack, will likely last us only another 100 years, and possibly for 1,000 years, if the fast breeder reactors would be allowed to be implemented. The use of thorium for nuclear power may extend the nuclear power resource limit by another 1,000 years. But this, too, is ultimately limited. There is simply no entropic energy resource available to humanity that will last through the next 90,000 years of the coming glaciation period, much less beyond it. Nuclear fusion power is not an exception from this built-in fate for entropic systems. Yes, nuclear fusion power is entropic in nature. Its entropy is located in lithium, which is essential for its basic fuel. Lithium exists in limited quantities in natural deposits. If nuclear fusion power became possible, its fuel resource would only last for roughly 400 years, when the world's lithium deposits are expected to be exhausted. The only option that humanity has for maintaining its future is to open the gateway of its soul. That would unblock the current barrier against the utilization of cosmic electric energy that exists abundantly, that powers the sun, and can even be photographed to encircle the Earth, but which is deemed not to exist. The cosmic energy resource is currently blocked by small-minded thinking that has been patiently cultivated under the rule of the oligarchic doctrine for keeping humanity small, dumb, and docile. The oligarchic system has been highly successful in placing its chokehold on humanity, which refuses to grow up. The self-refusing notion of humanity is so gross that it willingly supports the oligarchic program for depopulating the planet. The oligarchic powers aim to reduce the human presence from the current 7 billion persons being alive to less than 1 billion as rapidly as possible by destroying the world food supply, such as by massively burning it and by other similar measures. The programs for nuclear war and conventional perpetual war are advanced symptoms of society's refusal to grow up spiritually as human beings with a common universal humanity that should be developed rather than being decimated. With the portal to the divine soul closed, humanity cannot see its own value and freely allows its economies to be destroyed with the destruction of its industries, farming, science, culture, and, as of late, its financial system with speculative looting, bank bailouts, and also the fascist bank deposits bail-in processes that have already been prepared for. On this platform of dehumanizing destruction, the return of the next ice age assures the near or total extinction of humanity, which could potentially begin in 30 years. This can be prevented by us mobilizing the soul of our humanity. Soul stands at the center of our humanity, as in this model shown here. It appears that all aspects of our humanity flow through the center of soul reflected in man. In this deep sense, the entire model of man becomes a spiritual sun, with soul being the heart of this sun. Should humanity open the portal to its soul on this wide basis, and thereby find great value in itself, it would instantly latch onto the immense Ice Age challenge and be impelled to protect the value it sees in itself. This type of awakening in society would reawake its spiritual heart, its center, its creative and productive potential. It would become an adult civilization in this process. The process would enable it to create the needed scientific and industrial revolution with which the Ice Age challenge can be met, which is still possible, but is presently kept under wraps so tightly that it is deemed not to exist. If humanity would accomplish this spiritual breakthrough, its children would live. Presently, every person who expects to be alive 30 years from now, which includes most people who are 50 years or younger, will be exterminated in the coming Ice Age extinction, mostly by starvation, unless the world meets the Ice Age challenge before the Ice Age begins. Currently, society merely shrugs its shoulders, seeing no value in itself. Thus it keeps on playing its despicable games of genocide, nuclear war threats, financial looting, and economic destruction. In the oligarchic scene of the deepest self-denial of humanity, soul stands as a beacon of hope, and as the most critical factor that needs to be brought into the foreground, in order to be opened up as never before. All life literally hangs in the balance. The big question thus is, will humanity continue to refuse itself? Will it continue to deny itself, even as it denies the Ice Age challenge as a reality? The answer will decide the future of mankind, or the lack of it. The Ice Age challenge is presently the greatest challenge on the horizon of humanity by far. The principles for its occurrence are known. The evidence is strong. The consequences are enormous. The urgency is great. We have potentially 30 years remaining to meet the challenge. It is a narrow space for repentance that we have still left, with enough time for massive development. Nothing is comparable on the global scale to the sun going inactive, with a 70% reduction of its energy output. While we have our future within reach for our grasping as human beings, society's reaction is to do nothing. and dream away the hours it will never have restored, that become lost opportunities. As the German poet Friedrich Schiller lamented in a letter, in referring to the tragedies that humanity has suffered, saying that the great moments in history have all too often found society a small people, whereby the precious opportunities became lost. And with this loss, the freedom that had been at hand had not been realized. The nuclear war threat is a simple challenge to meet, in physical terms. It is known where all the bombs are located. They could be disabled in a week, whereby the nuclear war danger would exist no more. In comparison, the Ice Age challenge cannot be so easily met. The Ice Age challenge is imposed on us, not by ourselves, but by the dynamics of the universe. The challenge can be met by relocating our agricultural production, and industries, and cities, into the tropics, that will remain habitable in an Ice Age environment, under dimmer sun. This means placing much of the world's agriculture, together with new cities with free housing, across the tropical seas, on floating modules between the hurricane zones. When the human soul becomes activated to its inherent potential, the vast infrastructures that are needed for this can be produced in automated, high-temperature, industrial processes, including the construction of free housing. As an investment by society into itself, all this is possible. But will we do it? Or will we lay ourselves down to die as we, humanity as a whole, are presently committed to, by doing nothing? Thus Schiller's lament is appropriate again. Will the last opportunity, the last great moment that stands before us, find humanity, once again a pathetically small people, latched tenaciously to its death trap? The principle of universal love is the powerhouse that can get us out of the death trap, if it is honestly pursued. Truth opens the door to the riches we have within. It bears the fruit of our health and our holiness as the greatest form of life on the earth, which we, as a divine humanity, are. Life bears the fruit of immortal harmony. But love is king. It destroys all fear and heals the sickness in society, and its small-minded living. That should be deemed the greatest sin. As attributes of God, our divine elements are available to us to become manifest without reservation. In humanity, the divine mind is reflected individually, as one mind. God is incorporeal, but is reflected in man, and the universe. Divine love is reflected in love. The intelligence of the universe is incorporeal. By design, the divine, and only the divine, is incorporated in us, and in the universe. We are its intention unfolding. Its shape, beauty, sublimity, and its spirit manifest in myriad forms of expression. This also includes sex as an element of the divine, and an amazing one at that. It is an aspect of the all-encompassing dynamics of mind, soul, life, and love. It manifests truth, and principle, and spirit. It has its roots in all of these. It is a corporeal expression of the Infinite One, that is all, and is reflected in all. But what does this mean? This we have yet to discover in detail, step by step. Mary Baker Eddy responded by dissolving everything that didn't measure up, and then building on the gold that remained. On this basis she created a worldwide movement for spiritual healing. In slightly over 4 decades, starting with almost nothing. History also tells us that the 4 decades labor in discovering and establishing Christian Science were decades of the greatest peace and development that humanity had experienced in the last 600 years to date. What Mary Baker Eddy put onto the world scene with her work is an aspect of the universal kiss that does not fade into the dark, but retains its sparkle and stays alive for many days, and years, and centuries. Franklin Delano Roosevelt had built on the principle of the universal kiss, the kiss of the soul, which became reflected in his commitment to the principle of the general welfare. This principle has always stood, and still stands, in complete opposition to the system of oligarchy, a system that is fascist in nature, for its utter emptiness, existing without a principle, and life, and light. President John Fitzgerald Kennedy also built on the platform of the universal cause, in the Roosevelt tradition, fighting for the improvement of the human condition by every powerful means available, including to go deep into space and have the moon under our feet. Some may still remember his words from 1962, "We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard, because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills, because that challenge is one that we are willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one which we intend to win." It is for these reasons that I regard the decision last year to shift our efforts in space from low to high gear as among the most important decisions that will be made during my incumbency in the office of the presidency. For this inspiration and commitment to the general welfare of the nation and humanity, President John Kennedy was murdered by the system of oligarchy, just as humanity as a whole is set up to be murdered on the altar of the depopulation doctrine, and of the commitment of the oligarchy by all possible means, to prevent a meaningful response to the Ice Age challenge. Still, the love of these pioneers for humanity, and their commitment to its welfare, remains a light in the world which is destined to become the new fire. In the sparkle of the principle of universal love, the artificial distance that has been cultivated deeply between human hearts, which is deemed to be civility, becomes reduced to zero in the light of this principle, as the natural zero distance between all humanity is being laid bare before us. The zero-distance love is what the poets sing about and composers enfold into music, as the kind of love where all of love's rich colors melt together into a great symphony of tone, and color, and freedom, and humanity. Here unfolds the sun of the soul. Every star in the universe is a sun. It shines brightly, not by its own energy, but by the physical reflection of cosmic energy streams flowing into it. The cosmic energy is located in flowing plasma in cosmic space, made up of protons and electrons, which are themselves made up of structures of moving points of energy. What appears to be matter is but the dynamic construct of protons and electrons bound into atoms that are 100,000 times larger than the parts that form them. In physical terms, the universe is empty space pervaded by intelligently created structures that are created out of essentially nothing but energy. In physical terms, there exists no basic matter. The universe exists as empty space pervaded by intelligently created spiritual constructs. Inversely, the vast expanse of cosmic space is not totally empty, but is a vast sea of thinly dispersed free-flowing protons and electrons that carry an electric charge, which by this charge carry all the physical energy that powers the stars, the galaxies, and the universe as a whole. The universe is thereby actively self-powered. Contrary to general perception, the stars in the heavens are not powered by atomic fusion, but are powered by streams of inflowing energy from the sea of energy that pervades the universe. The cosmic electric energy is transformed by electric interaction at the surface of a sun into light and warmth that is reflected back and illumines the universe, which also creates the atomic structures that the universe is made of. These basic physical dynamics are also reflected in the spiritual dimensions. In spiritual terms, a star and a sun can be seen as both symbols of inflowing dynamics and outflowing dynamics. God, the infinite all, is spiritually the causative impetus, or the light of the universe, that the universe reflects. Thus, as a symbols, the star and the sun symbolize the inflowing and outflowing dynamics of God and God's reflection. Mary Baker Eddy used the symbolism in developing a new seal to symbolize the achieved adulthood in the development of Christian Science. As was stated earlier, she dissolved in 1889 all the material church structures that she had created and then reorganized the building of the church on a spiritual platform. This platform was put on the table in 1891 with the 50th edition of her textbook. The momentous transformation demanded a new seal. The first concept of the new seal was incorporated into a prominently located stained glass window of the church edifice constructed in 1894. The basic design became the official seal 13 years later when the underlying development for it was complete. If one looks closely, the crown of the seal in the window comes to light has a crown of 5 stars of 5 suns. In the new seal the 5 suns are 5 7-pointed stars, with 7 being the number of the 7 basic synonyms for God that Mary Baker Eddy had developed early in her scientific work. These 7 synonyms form the model that unfolds with the concept of soul at the center, which thereby becomes the center of a larger sun. The larger sun of soul can be seen to be represented by the unfolding new crown of 5 suns. The 5 suns in the crown, or 5 stars, with 7 points each, evidently represent something specific. They can be seen to represent the 3 basic pillars of civilization that Mary Baker Eddy had built on, which are the pillar of spiritual history, divine science, and scientific mental healing. With 2 lesser structures standing between them that may be termed temple and church. In the 4-column context, biblical spiritual history has served as impetus for spiritual awakening. Temple, then, relates to growing up, shedding the diapers, dissolving material structures, growing up in spirit. Church in turn represents spiritual adulthood. With that, the great church building began, on a spiritual rather than material basis. And on the far right, the healing element is the element of exuberance and spirit, the confidence that flows from acknowledged spiritual certainty. If one looks closely at this concept in terms of the crown that Mary Baker Eddy had developed for her seal published in 1881, it becomes apparent that only the 3 main pillars are identified with symbols for each sun. These symbols represent the sun, that is represented by the model for God and man, contained in the glossary, in the definition for God, in the form of a specific sequence of the synonyms from which the model for God and man was developed, which has the term soul at its center. The basis for this had existed in 1881. While the glossary didn't exist at the time, the 144-element version of the City Foursquare did exist, and was published in 1883 as a key to the scriptures. It appears that the superstructures were much more difficult to define than the basic structure. The first superstructure was put in place in 1891, at the end of her growing up period, when the diapers had been shed and the material structures had been dissolved. This first superstructure was presented in 1891 with her 50th edition of the textbook, in a new chapter, Science, Theology, and Medicine, within her scientific translation of Immortal Mind. In this translation the flow is from principle upwards to mind, unfolding the process of God unfolding its reflection in the universe. Mary Baker Eddy has produced 3 different sequences for the synonyms for God, for the forming of 3 different models. The first one is contained in the key that became the glossary. From this flows the model of God being reflected in man with soul at the center. The second sequence of the synonyms was produced for the translation of Immortal Mind, with the resulting model shown here. The third sequence of the synonyms was produced 16 years later in 1907. It was incorporated in the chapter Recapitulation. The chapter was developed from Mary Baker Eddy's original class book for her classes on scientific mental healing. She had began to teach her science in 1867, shortly after her original discovery of Christian Science. Its completion of the superstructure for the third development was signaled with the inclusion of her third sequence for the terms for God, with the term principle as the central sun for scientific mental healing. It appears that she waited with the publication of her new seal until all 3 of the different models with the terms for God were completed. The third one was completed in September 1907. After that, in April 1908, her new seal was published. The new seal could now represent all 3 of the star models, or sun models. The long-developed scientific conclusion occurred in the light of another majestic conclusion on the landscape of the Mother Church. In 1889 Mary Baker Eddy had dissolved all corporeal elements that she had built up over the previous 25 years and had developed a spiritual foundation for the church building to proceed. On this spiritual foundation, after the material foundation was dissolved, an explosive unfolding began, virtually from the ground up, of the spiritual dimension of church. The spiritual was immediately reflected in corresponding physical manifestations. On this basis, the original church edifice was completed in 3 years after the spiritual building process had begun. 4 years later, the edifice was already overflowing with the now expanding congregation. Soon, services had to be repeated several times each Sunday. 6 years after its dedication, the new edifice was so inadequate that the building of an extension for it was called for. The extension was voted up in 1902, and completed 4 years later, fully paid for. It was dedicated on completion day, on June 10, 1906. This tremendous achievement was the result of only 15 years of church building. Beginning with a new start, as the spiritual foundation had been established for the church building process in 1891. As I had mentioned before, 30,000 people had come to Boston for the dedication celebration. In the shadow of this accomplishment, an obvious question emerged: where do we go from here? It appears that Mary Baker Eddy had already the answer worked out. The next step in the expression of the expanding spiritual idea of church would have to unfold in the form of a newspaper designed to heal and uplift the world. With the generous support of the field, the task was completed in slightly over 2 years. By supporting this once again great church building project, the field was actually supporting itself by enabling a product that would enrich its world. Mary Baker Eddy named the newspaper the Christian Science Monitor and defined its mission to enrich all mankind. In this context, the new publishing house was built. It was completed and in operation 2 months before the first copy of the paper appeared on the newsstands. With the Monitor being designed to have a powerful healing impact on humanity in ever-expanding circles, the oligarchic system roused its forces to prevent this new instrument for universal freedom from being born. This is how the oligarchic system typically operates. The freedom of humanity to develop itself and its light within as an expression of God, manifest in peace, and the economic development of society to richly meet the human need is a mortal threat to the system of empire, the system of oligarchy that profits from stealing and looting and creating poverty that enables slavery in all its forms. The American nation has been built on the quest of society gaining its freedom from the despotism of the empires that ruled Europe. The quest of the Pilgrims had been to build a land for spiritual freedom. This quest had been under attack since the nation was born. America had been hard hit throughout its history, under the thumb of the oligarchic system. Many of its pioneers, including America's best presidents, who stood for the general welfare principle and the development of the nation, were assassinated in various ways throughout American history. In this context, Mary Baker Eddy was attacked by the oligarchic system as soon as the newspaper idea emerged on the horizon. The attack began 8 months after the Extension Temple was dedicated, and 1 month after the spiritual foundation was laid for moving ahead. The attack was orchestrated on a wide front. As a part of the attack, a legal suit was filed in March 1907, the historically famous Next Friends suit. It was launched in an attempt to seize Mary Baker Eddy's property and destroy her leadership authority in the church. A broad frontal assault throughout the press was coordinated with the suit. In order to give historians a sense of the force of the attack and its purpose, she included a note into the preface of her textbook thereafter that she had never read her textbook throughout consecutively in order to elucidate her idealism until June 10, 1907. The date is significant, as it is the anniversary day of the dedication of the extension and coincides with the frontal attack on her and the church. Since the suit was without merit, it collapsed in August that year. It collapsed after a court-appointed master of the case had come to her home for an interview. Legally, the attackers had no case, but the forces behind the case didn't allow the case to be withdrawn or be dismissed. Only the prosecution collapsed, as if to signal that the war had not ended, that a new phase of it had begun. With a path for the publication of the Monitor now being cleared of legal obstructions, the spiritual basis for establishing it was finalized by her and published in the textbook. After all this was done, her call for building an appropriate publishing house was issued. She herself relocated her entire household to Boston for this purpose at the beginning of the new year, the year of the Monitor, the year 2008. This was also the year in which the new Cross and Crown seal was issued, which was evidently published as a victory seal. That the attack on Mary Baker Eddy and the church had not ended when the next Friends suit collapsed became evident a few years after Mary Baker Eddy's passing. This occurred in 1916, when her victory seal became privatized as a registered corporeal trademark. By registering Mary Baker Eddy's seal, and also her personal signature, as commercial trademarks, the Mother Church had transformed itself into a corporeal club. That's what the registered trademark symbol certifies. The error that was committed by this move in the 1916 to 1918 time frame had reverted the church back to the type of foundation that Mary Baker Eddy had dissolved in 1889, in order that the spiritual church building could begin. With this error by the church, the original attack that had been launched with the next Friends suit, which had aimed to accomplish actually less, had now succeeded. It had overturned the critically important powerful foundation that the church had been built on. In the shadow of this error, the textbook itself was reduced to the status of a restricted private club book. In the posthumous stage, copyright claims typically serve to protect a product's commercial property value. The Christian Science textbook, and Christian Science itself, was constricted thereby. In earlier times, during Mary Baker Eddy's development years, the copyright symbol was applied to the textbook for the purpose of protecting the book in its development phase. More than 400 editions of the book had been produced by Mary Baker Eddy in this period. In 1910, when she laid the pen down, this phase was concluded. However, the development of Christian Science itself was not concluded at this point. In fact, the discovery phase of what Mary Baker Eddy has developed hadn't even begun. She said so herself, in essence, in the preface of the textbook, saying that future ages must declare what the pioneer has accomplished. The copyright constriction that reduces the textbook to a club book contravenes this purpose of ongoing development. The constriction serves no other purpose in this context than to secure the book's commercial value and to enable oligarchic control. The constricting error began in 1917, with the first posthumous renewal of the textbook's copyright status, followed by several more such renewals till 1934. After this, the constricting quest culminated with the lobbying for a special act of Congress to extend the constriction for the club book indefinitely, which passed in 1971. While the constriction was overturned 16 years later, after a lengthy battle in federal court, the mental effect of the restriction and constriction had done its damage. With the church thereby self-constricted to a club, its operational field collapsed in the USA by 93% from 1970 onward to the present, in terms of the numbers of listed practitioners and nurses. That's a huge collapse. 1,000 churches have closed their door in this time frame. The constriction had the corresponding effect. To date, the constricting quest continues under the mantle of the commercial trademark symbolism that renders spiritually significant symbols as registered commercial property of a corporate club, business, or corporation. The resulting choking effect has become so dense that a vast portion of Mary Baker Eddy's scientific and spiritual achievement is deemed not to exist. While the copyright constriction has been removed from the Christian Science hymnal in the approximate 2008 time frame, its traditional front cover image, an image of the original Mother Church edifice, and its extension, has been reduced to a commercial trademark symbol that thereby designates the hymnal as the songbook of a club. Christian Science is not a club. When the church was built on its spiritual foundation, to reflect in some degree the church universal and triumphant, the potential for any form of club status was laid aside. This high spiritual significance was further elevated in 1906 when the extension edifice was dedicated and referred to by Mary Baker Eddy in terms of what it represents in the spiritual dimension, saying, "Its crowning ultimate rise is to a mental monument, a superstructure high above the work of men's hands, even the outcome of their hearts, giving to the material a spiritual significance, the speed, beauty, and achievements of goodness. If one reduces this dull spiritual significance to the material status of a commercial club trademark, the spiritual significance is being negated thereby. The commercial trademark is fundamentally a mortal mind construct that has been engineered for the purpose of mental manipulation, such as the manipulation of public perception in favor of a branded product. Its intention was a form of mental malpractice right from the beginning. In ancient days, the headdress of the king became a symbol of status and rank, together with impressive garments that served the mental malpractice well. In later times, the crown became the symbol of power belonging to the monarchy. The crown remains the trademark of the monarchy to the present day, as a kind of uniform that specifies the superior office of the ruling oligarchy. It still serves the purpose of mental malpractice that isolates the oligarchy from the lowly society deemed commoners. All commercial registered status marks serve the purposes of mental malpractice instead of the freedom of humanity from oligarchic manipulation. What Christ Jesus and the Apostle John had visualized and had evidently worked with, and what Mary Baker Eddy had continued and built on into a majestic foundation for discovery, science, and healing, is presently deemed not to exist, or is deemed to have no value, or to be irrelevant, which indeed they would be for oligarchic purposes. While some discoveries were made over time of what Mary Baker Eddy had accomplished, especially from the 1940s onward, the overbearing weight of the restricting chokehold had prevented any significant further development of Christian Science to the present, and with it had prevented the unfolding freedom for humanity from its own chokeholds, the kind of freedom that Mary Baker Eddy had envisioned. Thus, the self-constricted club that the Christian Science Church defines itself as remains small to the present day and impotent in comparison with its potential, while humanity remains trapped into the ever-increasing smallness and disintegrating civilization that unfolds under the thumb of growing oligarchic forces. Humanity has an urgent need to break out from the chokehold of its constriction and smallness that allows immensely destructive developments to unfold within the dark hell of the oligarchic system that it is subjecting itself to, and its unfolding plans for depopulation, genocide, nuclear war, economic collapse, and silent plans for the near total ice age extinction of humanity. Humanity is in an urgent need to regain its freedom to be able to resume the kind of vast development that it is capable of on all fronts. As we suffer terribly under the constricting power of the dark hell of the oligarchic system, it is well to remember that Mary Baker Eddy had pioneered a path out of this hell. The path begins with recognizing the impersonal nature of this hell, and its secret methods based on cultivated lies that ensnare the soul sense of humanity. Mary Baker Eddy had a faint taste of this hell, and dissolved it in 1889, for the freedom of church building. She had a harsher taste when the Next Friends attack was launched, which her developed spiritual power had caused to collapse. Still, she warned humanity afterwards, especially the field of Christian Science, with an addition to the textbook, at the end of the chapter, Christian Science Practice, saying, "Christian scientists, be a law to yourselves that mental malpractice cannot harm you, either when asleep or when awake." The methods of mental malpractice are deep-reaching, secret, and ensnaring, and the outcome is devastating. I have devoted an entire chapter of my novel, Winning Without Victory, to explore the deeply hidden secret methods of mental malpractice, both symbolically and in real terms. I have named the chapter, The Imperial Bravo. It unfolds entirely in dialogue, as mental malpractice typically does, with boasts, and fear, and threats, and intimidation, and lies to hide its emptiness. Since the outcome of mental malpractice is threatening the whole of civilization, I have produced the dialogues of this chapter in the form of a two-part video with the same title. It can be found in the section for Dialogues for Civilization. Mary Baker Eddy warns about the consequences of being ensnared by the constriction of mental malpractice. She writes in the chapter, Atonement, and Eucharist, saying, if living in disobedience to him, we ought to feel no security, although God is good. The warning was borne out with the eruption of World War I. The war should have been avoided, but wasn't. Likewise, World War II was built entirely on aggressive mental malpractice, with the corresponding result. The warning still stands before us in the context of the Ice Age challenge that is deemed not to exist under the cultivated smallness resulting from mental malpractice, though it does exist as the greatest challenge that ever confronted modern humanity, and Christian Science has a critical role to play in meeting this challenge. While it is tempting to say that God will intervene so that the unmet challenge will not become an existential crisis, because, as Mary Baker Eddy states, that divine love always has met and ever will meet every human need. Oh yes, this statement is true. The reality is that God has already intervened and provided the solution for the challenge before the challenge was even recognized. Christian Science is the solution that God has provided to meet the greatest challenge in this age. It is the final revelation, as Mary Baker Eddy has referred to her discovery. It is the final installment towards the healing of the world, the final tool for meeting the ultimate challenge in the present landscape of the world. It is tempting to assume that Christian Science was inspired to heal humanity of the scourge of slavery. Mary Baker Eddy grew up against the background of society's prayers for this healing. However, Christian Science is too big to have been inspired just for that. Its enormous potential was evidently developed for a bigger purpose, the biggest purpose, to meet and master the Ice Age challenge. God's answer towards this end started already with the advent of Christ Jesus, when the climatic weakening began in earnest. Mary Baker Eddy was born during the early part of the rearming of Earth from the Little Ice Age, in the 17th and 18th century, which could be the most recent pulse of the Dansgaard-Oeschger events that have uplifted the climate of the last Ice Age briefly at intervals of 1,470 years. The development of Christian Science early in what is likely the most recent event of this type may be God's final inspiration to humanity to enable it to prepare itself for the impending Ice Age. The start of the next Ice Age will likely occur when the current Dansgaard-Oeschger event terminates, which appears to be near as 30 years from the present. This suggests that Christian Science is by divine design far more important for the welfare of humanity than even its supporters recognize to date. If this is the case, Christian Science is by design equal to the task when it is developed to its full potential. Thus, to squander this great opportunity that God bestowed on humanity with idleness and silly games would be synonymous with a crime against God and by humanity against itself. This is also how the current project should be seen, that aims to depopulate the world from the present 7 billion people to less than 1, with the genocide of starvation. Genocide in whatever form should be seen as a crime against God, who enabled a large population to develop on our planet, which is needed to build the far-flung Ice Age infrastructures. The contemplation of nuclear war, and more so the preparing for it, is likewise a crime against God, and for the same reason. The same can also be said for the currently ongoing economic collapse that assures starvation and mass genocide, which should all be termed a nuclear war and a crime against God. The destiny for Christian Science is to fulfill its divine purpose for humanity. It is the fulfillment of a great divine promise of boundless good. Without it, humanity has no hope, no future, no civilization, and no life. Inversely, with Christian Science becoming activated, society has a secure future before it, with a rich civilization, and would encounter no limits placed on its path that would bind it to impotence. Our task is to move with God and to develop the divine promise. This means for us to develop the provisions already bestowed on us by God, as a matter of principle, as completely as possible, for the full realization of the divine promise. In the divine sense, promise means principle. It implies that the full realization of the divine promise, as a matter of principle, is within reach. This also means that the time has come to stop fighting against God, to do away with constrictions, restrictions, and other games of mental malpractice, and to implement the divine promise for which Christian Science has been developed. Since Christian Science is presently choked into constricted and restricted smallness by the chokehold of mental malpractice, which is fundamentally oligarchic in nature, and is not rooted in God, in humanity, or in anything that is fundamentally real, the breakout from the self-made prison that has nothing substantial standing behind it should be imminently possible. Simply by knowing where the root of the chokehold is located, the hold can be dissolved, and the divine freedom for humanity to develop itself on all fronts be gained. With God's presence being felt in the heart and soul, man is free. Once this is done, once the chokehold is located, and the heart becomes free, not even the sky is the limit. This is what Mary Baker Eddy, and the Mother Church, with her, had demonstrated in stone. This is also what the field had demonstrated for itself in a rich measure with the building itself up with the monitor. In the publishing house an installation has been included that aids one in countering the false direction of mental malpractice. The installation is a maparium that enables one to look at the sphere of the world from the center outward. In spiritual terms, the center is God. Looking from the inside out is the scientific view that enables the correct perspective. This principle of looking from the inside out, from the center of the soul, as it were, was illustrated long before the maparium was created. We find it illustrated in the stained glass window at the front of the original Mother Church edifice, with which the great church building process began. The scene in the window is arranged in such a manner that its correct perspective can only be seen from the inside. When seen from the outside, the scene is reversed. The same is true of the crown in the seal. If one looks at it superficially, one sees a sparse crown with 5 stars. But if one looks outward from the depth of what the stars represent, the crown becomes a majestic symbol. One sees a majestic crown by beholding scientific wonders that are deemed not to exist. Then one also sees the underlying models that are likewise deemed not to exist. One discovers thereby that they do exist. One also sees the underlying superstructures and their models that are built on the biblical city foursquare, such as the 144-element glossary structure, the 16-element Christian Science platform structure, and the 24-element recapitulation structure. One finds great riches unfolding. The Lord's Prayer thereby becomes a majestic 16-part construct that is directly rooted in the biblical city foursquare. Likewise, the textbook chapters themselves are raised from the status of being a collection of articles to being an integral part of the city of complex spiritual concepts that Christ Jesus had evidently begun to develop, and Mary Baker Eddy had carried forward. The same applies to the 16 parts of her illustrated poem, Christ and Christmas, and also to the 16 segments of the church manual. Even the topics of the lesson sermons that are repeated twice a year in Christian Science churches in many parts of the world are anchored in this complex of spiritual, scientific structures that Mary Baker Eddy has created in a development period spanning 44 years. She left us with a monumental legacy that has the potential to uplift and heal the world. The legacy that Mary Baker Eddy has left us, when it is utilized and developed further, will without fail inspire a new renaissance in the world of such power that not even the coming ice age will have an effect on the living of humanity in the sunshine of this renaissance. The Christian Science Monitor will no doubt play a leading part in the building and unfolding of this culminating ice age renaissance, in which the greatest challenge in human history can be met and mastered. Divine Science opens to us a spiritual universe of 3 suns. It beckons us to develop those suns and the models for them, and also the structures that the models are representing, including the superstructures, such as the temple and the Christian Science Monitor. Mary Baker Eddy spoke of the concept of superstructures in glowing terms when she referred to the great temple of the Mother Church on its dedication day. You have dexterously and wisely provided for the Mother Church of Christ, Scientist, a magnificent temple wherein to enter and pray. Greatly impressed and encouraged thereby, deeply do I thank you for this proof of your progress, unity, and love. The modest edifice of the Mother Church of Christ, scientist, began with the cross. Its excelsior extension is the crown. The room of your leader remains in the beginning of this edifice, evidencing the praise of babes, and the word which proceedeth out of the mouth of God. Its crowning ultimate rises to a mental monument, a superstructure high above the work of men's hands, even the outcome of their hearts, giving to the material a spiritual significance, the speed, beauty, and achievements of goodness. Methinks this church is the one edifice on earth which most prefigures self-abnegation, hope, faith, love, catching a glimpse of glory.